Sure, it goes up and down 50, 60, 70% down, but its upside is 10, 50, 100x. It's the same kind of bet, but better than the baby boomers got in 1980. You almost have to be an idiot not to make money. Well, right now, the equity markets are at all-time record valuations. Sure, emerging markets have done relatively worse, so maybe they're relatively more interesting, but they're expensive. Bond yields are all-time lows. Credit, all-time low yields. So you're not being paid to take risk. Most of these have a future expected return that's negative. But then there's a whole different world out there, which is the world of a new financial system being built, which is Bitcoin and Ethereum and DeFi and all of this stuff that people are hearing about. And Gen Z and millennials are much more aware of this because Gen Z particularly have lived in Minecraft and all of these things where tokens and digital assets have value. Right? It's not abnormal. It's abnormal for a baby boomer to think about that, but everybody else is like, yeah, of course it is. Tokens, of course we live with different currencies in different worlds. It's not a problem. So it's a small leap to Bitcoin, which has a future expected value higher than any other asset class in terms of risk reward. Sure, it goes up and down 50, 60, 70% down, but its upside is 10, 50, 100x. So if you're young, you can afford to take that bet because it can be life-changing. It's the same kind of bet, but better than the baby boomers got in 1980 when they were about 30 years old. Because what did they get? When they were 30 years old, they got a stock market at record low valuations and a bond market with record high yields. You almost have to be an idiot not to make money. Millennials are faced with something much harder, as are Gen Z, because property is expensive too, unless you move. So if you think that you can get a quality of life in Thailand, because you're in Hong Kong, and you say, you know, I'm not going to hang around in Hong Kong any longer, I'm going to go to Thailand, you can easily run a business from Thailand. Okay, so now you've got a quality of life advantage. You can probably buy a house for pretty cheap. Okay, so now you're safe and secure, and now you look at your future potential, well, Bitcoin might be that answer. So it's going to be a new world, and that's good, because you guys, the millennials and the Gen Z, are not going to be following the old rules. And once you realize that, you're liberated. So the retirement crisis is essentially the fact that the largest cohort of people in the world is the baby boomers. Yes, the millennials in the US are slightly larger than the baby boomers, but elsewhere in the world, nobody had such a large millennial population. So the baby boomers are everything. They hold all the wealth, they have all the pensions, and they're all between 60 and 75. So they're hitting retirement age. Problem is, particularly in the US, is they have massive overweight equities and high risk because they never got enough money into their pensions. Now, when you go into recession, equity returns generally go down. We've got this weird market right now, which is bifurcated. A bunch of equities are doing terribly. The big names are going up. Banks, oil companies, industrial companies, they're all doing terribly. And that's partly because the baby boomers are forced to sell equities over time. Because if you think about it, when you stop earning money, you need to sell your assets over time to realize the money to spend. The problem is as that goes on and bond yields go so low, these guys don't have enough money to retire on. Now, if that stock market rolls over again because the economy actually ends up weighing on these high-flying stocks that everybody thinks are bulletproof, then we've got a huge problem because you're going to wipe out the retirement savings at retirement date of people who now can't earn a new income. So that's a really terrifying situation. Again, for the millennials, you've got a bifurcated view here because on one hand, you don't want your parents to get screwed over by this because it's going to become your problem. But the other side is like, yeah, please, I'd like you to sell your expensive houses at much cheaper prices and sell your equities to me at much cheaper valuations. That's how you should be thinking in this. But you've got the other emotional side is, well, I don't want to see my parents go through hardship. But that's where we are. That's the situation. And that will play out over the next 10 years. If you're 30 years old, this is the biggest opportunity of your lifetime. Out of crisis comes opportunity. So what you've done is you've cleared out a load of old businesses and the world is changing. I noticed this when I went to Japan a few years ago, is it bifurcates between the big brands and the big businesses and then artisanal stuff. And we've seen that movement already across the US, across Europe, where people are opening, young people are opening like a Cool Bakers or a cool clothing place where they make cool clothing themselves and stuff like that. So there is a bifurcation that's going on. And what you've just done is cleared out the high street
Mm.
of all of the old shit that needed to go. Now, that's painful and horrible because it's people's life savings and their businesses. But thinking like you should is, okay, all of that old stuff is gone. Rents are collapsing. I could start a business.
Mm-hmm.
Your probability of success of starting a business in a down cycle is so much higher than starting it when rents are high. You're competing for everything. And it is about doing unique stuff. Find your niche. The world used to be like Amazon, broad, but we're all finding that deep is the other strategy. I mean, to have a creative idea for a business in New York City or Hong Kong or London, yeah, you get marginalized to the kind of other neighborhoods. Well, guess what? That's going to change. So yes, it's terrible. And yes, it's going to be lingering. And yes, it's miserable for many. But change is always opportunity. The good thing that younger people have is all their future earnings ahead of them. So if anybody wants to make the biggest investment, make it in yourself. That's the key thing. We also operate in a world where you can have multiple revenue streams, because you might be able to make revenue from one thing and then from your main job. But so think about that robustness. Build your own portfolio. And that's about the robustness of your income stream and where you want to go in life. So then if you're 30 years old and you've got ahead of you, the next 30 years of trying to accumulate wealth, well, firstly, don't forget, income is worth more than capital. Because if you have $1 million and you stick it in the bond market, you're going to get $10,000 a year, right? But for the average person to, over a couple of years, increase their income by $10,000 is not that unachievable. So it's like being a millionaire. Every 10 grand you have is like being a millionaire in terms of your earning power. So that's the key thing. Then after that, it's like, okay, look at the opportunity set in front of you. So let's say you're in a good job now, you're starting to invest, you're starting to save for the future. What is it? Well, my first thing always for everybody is, if you can, buy a home. Now that's the problem because they're expensive in most places. When you're in a safe place, to take risk becomes very attractive. So I would urge people to think about that. Get to that point of safety where you know you could take risk, then take risk. I'm going to say that when I was at Goldman and I had to hire and be part of the graduate intake, I would reject all of those people.
Right.
Because they're identikit. The actual thing that gives career success really is character and diverse, broad experiences. Those two things combined with a sense of competing with oneself and not with everybody else is, I think, the defining thing of success. So I would always choose people who traveled over people who went to work at Credit Suisse in their summer holidays, because I want that person who's backpacked through the Amazon, because guess what? They can throw anything that life comes at them. I want to see people who have a personality, who have a character, that done things that are sociable and interactive, and not just for their CV, just for the sheer joy of it. You want those people because they're adaptable. And if they're smart as well, then you've got the Holy Grail.